If you've ever walked past a retail storefront and noticed how some security grills are perfectly invisible during the day, while others look like clunky metal boxes bolted to the wall, you're actually looking at the difference between proactive architectural planning and reactive retrofitting. Today, we're diving into this explainer to look at the sheer logistics of how architects integrate security shutters seamlessly right from the blueprint phase, long before the drywall ever goes up.
So, here's our blueprint for today. We're going to cover the problem with retrofits, the architectural drawing stage, requirements for GC coordination, deliverables during construction, defining the build-out, and finally, specialty installs and timing. Let's get right into it.
Starting with Section 1, the problem with retrofits.
You see, a lot of shutter installs out there are actually just reactive retrofits. A business owner has been in a building for years, a sudden security need pops up, and an installer has to figure out how to force a heavy metal shutter onto a storefront that was literally never designed to hold one. The result? It takes way longer, it costs more, and honestly, it just looks visibly awkward from the outside. But look at a coordinated new build. When an architect bakes that security spec right into the initial design, the install is incredibly smooth, it's cheaper, and it's completely cleanly built in.
The real takeaway here is that failing to coordinate early turns a basic shutter into a massive, late-stage design nightmare. Like if the architect doesn't know the shutter specs when they draw up the storefront, that housing box is going to end up exposed on the outside when it definitely wasn't supposed to be. Or even worse, if it's mounted on the interior, you actually lose ceiling height because the box drops below the structural header. For any architect trying to keep those crisp, clean elevations, coordinating this before the drywall goes up is absolutely crucial.
All right, moving on to Section 2, the architectural drawing stage. 8 to 12 inches. Take a second and think about that size. That's the physical depth of a typical commercial shutter housing. These shutters don't just magically bolt flush to a wall. They roll up into a metal box during the day. And depending on the spec, that box is usually 8 to 12 inches deep and maybe 8 to 10 inches tall. This means the architect needs some serious spatial foresight before the framing is locked in. That box has to live somewhere, right? Tucked inside the building above the door or outside above it. The storefront framing, the soffit detail, the structural header, all of it has to physically make room for it.
And this timeline shows exactly why that early coordination is so vital. If you get the shutter installer in the room at the very beginning, the drawing stage, the architect integrates the housing, the framer accounts for the load, and boom, by the time you hit the pre-storefront close, the installation goes in perfectly clean with zero aesthetic compromises.
Which brings us to Section 3, requirements for general contractor coordination.
When the installer is part of the conversation early on, the framing accounts for the housing, the header carries the load, and these 4 key requirements literally become simple 15-minute chats. First up, power. Motorized units need a dedicated circuit. Second, a junction box. If you rough this in right at the motor location, the installer can just hook it up with a short whip. Third, structural support. The framing header actually has to carry that concentrated load. And fourth, and this is a big one for architects, the finish coordination decision. Shutter slats come in standard finishes like mill, white, or bronze. The architect's finish schedule needs to call this out early, just like they would for paint or hardware, so you don't end up with a mismatched metal box ruining the whole elevation.
Just picture it, a very unhappy electrician trying to pull wire after the storefront is completely finished. It's a completely unnecessary headache if you just plan ahead. This quote really hits the nail on the head for new builds. Pulling a new run after the drywall is up is messy. Pulling it while the walls are still open is cheap. Roughing in that junction box early, it saves everyone a ton of time and definitely eats up way less of the budget.
Okay, let's jump into Section 4, deliverables during construction.
So what does the installer actually bring to the table? They deliver 3 distinct items to make sure the framing, electrical, and finish crews are all on the exact same page. First, shop drawings showing the exact housing dimensions and motor locations. These go straight into the construction set. Second, cut sheets and spec compliance docs, which are an absolute must if the building department demands a specific standard. And third, a sequencing recommendation, so the installation crew shows up exactly when the site is actually ready. For the architect, these docs are the ultimate guarantee that their initial vision will be executed flawlessly in the field.
Now, there is a very deliberate line in the sand here. The installer provides all that technical documentation we just talked about to satisfy the city. But when it comes to actually signing as the responsible party and pulling the required permits, that responsibility falls squarely on the owner, the GC, or the architect.
All right, Section 5, defining the build-out.
This is kind of wild, but the exact same word can mean 2 completely different things depending on who you ask on a job site. When a GC talks about a build-out, they mean the whole multi-month construction phase of that commercial space. But ask a shutter installer? To them, a build-out is just a tiny, specifically fabricated bracket and header structure that pushes the shutter forward just enough so it clears a door handle when it rolls down.
And here's why that matters. That little shutter side build-out affects the visible depth of the install, making the shutter sit proud of the door by a few inches. If an architect is dreaming of a completely flush detail, they absolutely have to know about this mini structure at the drawing stage so they can spec a different mount. If the construction documents just vaguely say shutter on door A, the installer is going to use that small build-out by default. For an architect obsessing over super clean lines, that unexpected depth is a nasty surprise right at the finish line.
Moving on to our final section, Section 6, Specialty Installs and Timing.
Specialty specs have totally different structural demands, as you can see here. Riot glass, for instance, goes inside the existing storefront glass, meaning absolutely no framing changes are required. Polycarbonate sits inside individual display cases, so it's completely independent of the building's construction. But counter shutters? They require the exact same intense architectural coordination as standard storefront shutters, just scaled down. They still need dedicated housing and power designed right into the plans.
Now let's talk timeline. The actual physical installation is incredibly fast. We're talking just 1 to 2 days on site per opening. But the materials, those can take up to 6 weeks to arrive from the manufacturer. You just can't rush that. That's exactly why getting the architect specs dialed in at the drawing stage is a total game changer. It empowers the GC to confidently order materials right at the framing stage while the walls are still wide open.
So, if you're a GC or an architect pricing a project right now, these are the exact 3 steps you need to take to guarantee a flawless, clean installation. Step 1. Bring the shutter installer into the conversation at the drawing stage. Step 2. Share the actual architect's drawings to prevent any mounting errors. And Step 3. Call out the storefront finish schedule explicitly. Seriously, don't let the metal finish of a massive security shutter become some awkward last-minute mismatch decision.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about this the next time you walk through a brand new commercial space. Look up at the doorways. Do you see a bulky metal housing ruining the ceiling height, or does the security system just effortlessly disappear into the architecture? True structural elegance is all about that behind-the-scenes coordination that you never even see. So, is your building security seamlessly built in, or is it just bolted on? Thanks for diving into the blueprints with me today.